Silas Whitmore sat alone in his cabin, a small but sturdy structure on the outskirts of the sprawling wilderness that had been his only companion for the last 30 years. The isolation suited him. After the death of his wife, he'd built walls around his life, physical ones around his property, emotional ones around his heart. A rancher's life, simple and quiet, was all he needed. No neighbors, no visitors, just the hum of nature and the predictable rhythm of chores. But today, everything had changed. The traveling merchant had arrived like any other, selling grain, salt, and a variety of supplies, and offering an unusual deal. A half-priced crate, one that Silas had taken without much thought. Moving inventory fast, the man had said. It made sense at the time. No reason not to pick up a few extra things, especially when the price was right. But the crate, once opened, held something far more unsettling than supplies: a baby. A tiny bundle wrapped in a worn blanket, left abandoned in the crate like it was just another piece of cargo. The baby's eyes fluttered open for a brief moment as Silas looked down at it, and the first thought that struck him was the sheer impossibility of the situation. He had never asked for this. He was alone, by choice, by necessity. The isolation had protected him, kept him from feeling the weight of responsibility. And yet, here was a child, alone, helpless, and utterly dependent on him for survival. The baby made a soft noise, a tiny cry that seemed to pierce through the wall Silas had built around himself. He looked down at the small face, feeling an unexpected tug in his chest. What could he do? What should he do? His first instinct was to walk away, to leave the baby behind and return to the way things were. He could saddle up and ride to town, demand answers from that merchant. Surely someone there would know who the child belonged to. The logical thing to do would be to return the baby to its rightful family, to not get involved in something that would complicate his already solitary life. But the baby's tiny hand reached out from the blanket, its fingers curling and uncurling as it searched for something, anything to hold on to. The sheer fragility of it all stopped Silas in his tracks. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but it was futile. This wasn't just some abandoned piece of property. This was a human life, helpless and vulnerable, lying in front of him. Something stirred deep within him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience in years. It was fear, raw and unfiltered. Fear of the responsibility that came with caring for a child. Fear of what keeping it would mean, and what letting it go would mean. Could he do this? Could he take care of this helpless creature, knowing that it would change everything about his quiet, isolated life? He took a step back, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for the crate's lid, then paused. He could still feel the baby's grip on his thumb, surprisingly strong for such tiny fingers. Something in the contact shifted within him. For the first time in years, Silas felt his resolve begin to crack. As he stood there, paralyzed by indecision, the sound of hooves on the dirt road broke his concentration. He froze. The sound of multiple horses approaching his cabin, their voices carried by the wind. There were 3 of them, and their presence meant trouble. Silas's heart began to race. The last thing he wanted was to deal with strangers, especially strangers who might have an interest in the baby. He slammed the crate shut, hiding it behind a stack of flour sacks, then moved quickly to the window. He could see them clearly now. 2 men dressed in dark coats, their faces hard with desperation, and a woman, her face drawn with exhaustion. They looked like they'd been riding hard for days. The lead rider dismounted and approached the cabin. His cold eyes studied the place with a calculating gaze. "Afternoon, mister," he called out. "We're looking for a merchant who passed through here, thin fellow, driving a wagon full of supplies. You seen him?" Silas kept his expression neutral, his heart hammering in his chest. "Saw him this morning. Bought some grain. Moved on." The woman urged her horse forward. "Did he sell you anything else? A crate, maybe? Something he seemed eager to get rid of." The baby whimpered softly from inside the cabin, and Silas's heart skipped a beat. His pulse quickened as he glanced back toward the crate, his hand instinctively moving toward the door. But he kept his cool, stepping out onto the porch to distract the riders. "Grain and salt, nothing special," he said, his voice steady. But the woman's eyes were sharp, and she was studying him with too much intensity. "We're missing something important," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. "Something that belongs to us." At that, Silas's mind raced. They knew about the merchant and they might know about the baby. It wasn't just a coincidence. He had no idea what he was dealing with, but he knew one thing for certain. These people weren't here to ask for directions. The second rider, a younger man, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Tell him about the reward," he said nervously. "Elena," the leader snapped, a harsh tone cutting through the air. The woman, Elena, looked at Silas, her eyes pleading. "If you have it, we'd be grateful to get it back. $50. The amount of money made Silas's chest tighten. He hadn't seen that much cash in years, enough to buy everything he would need for the entire winter, with plenty left over. All he had to do was hand over a baby. But handing over the baby wasn't a decision he was ready to make. Not yet. Not when every instinct told him that something was terribly wrong about all of this. The baby cried again, louder this time, as if calling out to Silas for help. Elena looked at him, her expression softening. "Please," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "We've been looking for him everywhere. He's ours. Please." Silas could see the raw emotion in her face, the desperation of a mother who had lost her child. But there was something off about her too. The way her voice cracked, the way she kept glancing back at her companions. "You're not his parents," Silas said quietly, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. The leader's hand dropped to his gun. "Careful, old man," he warned. "You've been helpful so far. Don't ruin it now." But Silas wasn't afraid anymore. Not of them, not of the money, and certainly not of the baby. The more he looked at Elena, the more he realized the truth. These people were lying. They weren't here to rescue anyone. They were here to take something. The baby's cries grew more frantic as Elena shifted uncomfortably in her arms. "Why won't he stop?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. "He's supposed to be fine. He's just supposed to be fine." And Silas knew what was coming. He could see it in the way the woman was holding the baby, her movements growing more frantic. The baby didn't know her. The baby didn't trust her. Silas stood frozen in the doorway, the weight of the situation pressing on him like the oppressive heat of a summer afternoon. His hand hovered near the rifle he kept by the door, but he wasn't sure if he should reach for it. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, but the pieces wouldn't fit. He could feel the truth sinking in, slowly and painfully, like a stone dropping into deep water. The woman, Elena, had placed the baby back into the crate, her hands shaking slightly as she did so. The leader of the group, Frank, had already moved toward the back of the cabin, muttering to himself as he searched for anything of value. The tension in the air was palpable. Everything had changed in a matter of moments, and Silas felt trapped in a situation that seemed too complex for him to navigate. But it didn't matter. These people weren't here to find a lost child. They weren't here to rescue someone. They were here to steal. And Silas wasn't going to let them. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood still, watching them. They were acting like this was business as usual, like they had done this 100 times before. Frank's movements were quick and efficient, while Elena stood near the door, her eyes flicking between Silas and the baby. "Who are you really?" Silas asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil swirling inside him. Elena's eyes narrowed. "I already told you. We're the child's parents. We've been looking for him for days." She spoke with the kind of practiced calm that didn't match the panic in her eyes. "We need to take him back." Silas shook his head slowly, his suspicion growing. "You're not his parents." His voice was firm now, each word more certain than the last. The leader, Frank, turned toward him, his expression darkening. "We don't have time for this, old man. You've seen what we're capable of. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The words hit Silas like a punch in the gut. He had spent years avoiding conflict, staying as far away from people as possible. But now he was standing face to face with these criminals, and they were threatening him. They were using fear to manipulate him, trying to force him into submission. Silas's hand slowly moved toward the rifle slung across his back. He wasn't going to let these people take the baby. He wasn't going to let them do to Thomas what they had done to so many others. He could see it now, the desperation in Elena's eyes, the way she cradled the baby in her arms like it was the most precious thing in the world. But she wasn't holding Thomas out of love. She was holding him because he was a prize, something to be traded, something to be used. "You're not his parents," Silas repeated, his voice low and unyielding. "I'm not letting you take him." Frank stepped forward, his hand hovering over the gun at his hip. "I don't want to hurt you, old man, but you're making this difficult." Silas's eyes never left Frank. "If you think I'm afraid of you, you're wrong." The silence between them stretched thin, each of them waiting for the other to make the first move. Silas knew what he had to do. He knew that the moment they realized he wasn't going to give in, they would turn violent. The thought of the baby, of Thomas, still crying in the crate, pushed Silas's resolve to its breaking point. With a sudden movement, he grabbed the rifle and leveled it at Frank. "I said no." Frank's eyes flicked to his companions, then back to Silas, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You think you can stop us? You think you can take us all on?" Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. "I'm not afraid of you, of." The tension broke like a snap of a twig underfoot. Frank lunged toward him, but Silas was faster. He fired a shot, and the bullet hit Frank square in the shoulder, knocking him back. Frank let out a sharp cry, clutching his wound as he staggered, dropping to his knees. The other two men who had been standing behind him immediately raised their guns, but Silas was already moving. He ducked behind the cabin doorframe, the sound of the shots still ringing in his ears. The baby's cries had grown louder now, more frantic. Silas's heart twisted with guilt and determination. He couldn't let these people take him. Not now, not after everything he had gone through. This child deserved better than to be used as a pawn in some twisted game. He peeked out from behind the doorframe, aiming at the two remaining men. They were moving quickly now, trying to circle around him. They knew what he was capable of, and they weren't going to back down. But Silas wasn't going to let them win. He couldn't. The door to the cabin suddenly slammed open and Elena ran out, holding Thomas close to her chest. "I'll go," she shouted, her voice breaking. "Just leave us alone." But Silas wasn't listening. He was focused on the two men who had just turned the corner, guns raised. He fired again, hitting the first one in the leg. The man crumpled to the ground with a shout, clutching his wound. The second man hesitated, his gun aimed directly at Silas's chest. "You don't have to do this," Silas called out, his voice calm despite the chaos. "You're not going to win." The man faltered, his hands shaking as he lowered his weapon. He didn't want to die here. He didn't want to fight anymore. And in that moment, Silas saw the fear in his eyes, the realization that they were all in over their heads. Elena didn't wait. She rushed toward the horses, still holding Thomas, her footsteps hurried and desperate. Silas didn't want to take his eyes off her, but the man on the ground was still breathing, still a threat. He turned back to the wounded man and fired a warning shot, aiming for the gun in his hand. The man dropped the weapon immediately, his hands raised in surrender. "We're done," Silas said, his voice low and final. "Please," the man begged, his voice shaking. "Don't kill us." Silas looked down at him, then at the others. Frank was still on the ground, holding his shoulder, but he wasn't moving. The other man was still clutching his leg, groaning in pain. "You're not going to hurt anyone again," Silas said, his voice hard. "Not while I'm here." Elena, now mounted on a horse, was pulling away from the cabin. But Silas didn't care anymore. She had made her choice. Now it was time for him to make his. He turned back toward the cabin where the sound of the baby's cries still echoed in his mind. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He was going to protect this child, no matter the cost.